Trying to keep on schedule here. I know everybody's busy, so I don't want to delay any further. If I know my members are trickling in, but I think we'll go ahead and get back at it. And we got some good information coming now from our state economist, Dr. Corey Miller. I know, Dr. Miller, you testified at a hearing here recently, but we're here about teachers and the teacher salaries, and you may get questions about that other issue, but my primary focus, as we talked about, is how we can help our teachers. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Barr. Appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. I'm briefly going to discuss adjusting for cost of living differences across states in the context of public school teacher salaries. And I hope I don't get too wonky here when I get into some of this. But each year since 2008, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis has released, along with its real income data, what are known as regional price parities for all states. I'm going to shorten that to RPP. These are measures that account for differences in the price level across states each year. By construction, the value of an RPP for the United States equals 100, and the values for each state are expressed as percentages of the U.S. value. So these price parities represent a way of measuring the relative cost of living in each state. In other words, just compared to the U.S. average. Now, these relative rankings, and these are in the first table here on the screen for the most recent year. These relative rankings among the states don't change that much from year to year, although the values of the parities for most states will change slightly from one year to the next. This table has the parities for each state according to BEA for 2019, which is the most recent year available. As in the case in most years, I mean, I can see, but at the top, Hawaii had the highest price parity in 2019 among all states with a value of 119.3. That's up slightly from the previous year. So the interpretation of this value is that of 119.3 means that on average, all items sold in Hawaii in 2019 cost 19.3% more than the US average, giving Hawaii the highest cost of living among states for that year. And Hawaii is usually top or near the top. And if you've ever been to Hawaii, then you know things are more expensive in there. Now, the state with the lowest RPP value among all states in 2019, according to BEA, was Mississippi. And I have it highlighted at the bottom there. The value of the state's RPP in 2019 was 84.4, down a little bit from the previous year. So the analogous interpretation of this value is that on average, all items sold in Mississippi in 2019 cost 15.6% less than the US average. So according to BEA, Mississippi had the lowest cost of living among all states in 2019. BEA has been calculating these, as I said, since 2008, and in each year except 2018, the value for Mississippi has been the lowest or tied for the lowest among all states. The only exception was 2018, when the value of the state's RPP was smaller than all states except in the District of Columbia, except Arkansas. So further getting into this table, a total of 17 states had these regional price parity values above 100, which means the relative cost of living in those states is slightly higher than the US average. So these are states that have some of the largest metropolitan areas in the country, such as New York, California, New Jersey, a few others in there. And some of them are relatively isolated, such as Hawaii, also Alaska. These states tend to have the highest price parity values because of the way BEA computes this particular index. The way they calculate it, they assign weights to the values that make up an individual's total expenditures in a year And in general, housing costs represent an individual's largest single expenditure. So the primary reason the cost of living as measured by these price parities is relatively higher in states with large metropolitan areas or states that are relatively isolated is because the cost of housing in those states is higher. So more rural and less populated states, specifically Mississippi, tend to have lower housing costs, and therefore we have lower price parity values. BEA also breaks down these indexes into what are effectively sub-indexes for other items. These include the value for goods. And in 2019, the value of that index for Mississippi was 94.4, which means the value of goods or the cost of goods in the state is only somewhat below the US average. And another index, they look at services. In Mississippi in 2019, that cost was 90.3. So again, only somewhat different or slightly below the US. Now, the other sub-index they compute is for housing or for rents, excuse me. And that value in 2019 was only 60, and that was the lowest among all states. So that's the primary explanation for why Mississippi, as measured in this list, has the lowest cost of living among all states. So having set this up in terms of purchasing power, we can look at the purchasing power of salaries in different states. So if we divide a salary in a particular state by that state's regional price parity and do the same for an equivalent salary in other states, then we can compare those salaries across states as that adjustment equalizes the purchasing power. So a salary in a state with a regional price parity value above 100 is going to be adjusted down. So in a state with a salary in a state with a price parity value less than 100 is going to be adjusted up. Now, second table here, this lists average salaries of public school teachers by state for the 2019-2020 year. This was the most recent year available, and this is according to the National Education Association. Now, although the NEA is a labor union, it is also recognized as a source for teacher salary data and other statistical information regarding public schools. So in this table, I have it highlighted at the bottom, the average teacher salary for Mississippi of $46,843 was last among all states in the District of Columbia. The average salaries of teachers in the states that border Mississippi, and that's the other 4 states I have highlighted in that table, rank between 35 and 47 in 2019-2020. And almost all states in the Southeast had average teacher salaries that were ranked in the bottom half of all states, with the one exception of Georgia, which came in at 19th. Again, some of the highest salaries in this list are also some of the most expensive states, as we saw in the other table, like New York, California, New Jersey, Massachusetts. So the next table I will show has the same data from the previous table, except it's been adjusted for the regional price parities or adjusted for purchasing power. So after we adjust for the salary, for the purchasing power, the average salary in Mississippi increases as our purchasing price parity, our regional price parity was below 100. That increases to about $55,500 after this adjustment. That moves the state's average salary up to 48th among all states in the District of Columbia, ahead of Hawaii, Arizona, and Florida. It's also separated by less than $1,000 from the next 4 highest average salaries, which are New Hampshire, South Dakota, Montana, and Maine, also relatively small states. Now, the relative rankings of the average salaries for the border states, the Mississippi, they improve as well, and they also have slightly greater improvements or greater improvements after adjustment using the price parities. And so these ranks improve from 21 to 36, as I have them highlighted in the table following this adjustment. So that's the basic data, salary data. I also have two other sets of tables I'd like to show that just kind of provide additional perspective on salaries in terms of adjustment. This salary data is for the 2017-2018 school year. It comes from the U.S. Department of Education and the National Teacher and Principal Survey for that year. This is the average annual base salary of public school teachers by state. According to this, the average base salary at the time in Mississippi was $43,900, which ranked 46th among the 49 states they surveyed. They did not get responses in Maryland and the District of Columbia for whatever reason. So the state ranks 46 and exceeds the base salaries in North Carolina, Arizona, and Oklahoma, and is only $400 less than the average base salary of West Virginia, which was the next largest state. Also have highlighted again the average base salaries of the 4 states that border Mississippi, and their salaries range in this list from 32 to 43. As in the previous tables, most states in the Southeast are in the bottom half of all states for average base salary. The exceptions are again Georgia and also Texas, which rank 22nd and 24th in this list. Again, on the whole, the relative rankings are pretty similar to the previous table. Now, in this next table, I've adjusted the same salary data in the previous table, again, using those regional price parities, except this time I used them for 2018. So after the adjustment, the average base salary in Mississippi for 2018 increases to about $51,300, which ranks 37th out of 49 states. After adjustment, the average base salary in Louisiana ranks 36th and is only a couple $100 higher. The relative rankings for Arkansas, Alabama, and Tennessee after this adjustment, they also improved, increasing to 20th, 21st, and 27th in this list, again, ahead of Mississippi. One last set of tables I want to show is more salary data, slightly different type. This comes from the Southern Regional Education Board. These are the annual take-home salaries of public school teachers by state who have 15 years of experience. So kind of in the midpoint of their career. And this is as of 2019 for the 16 states that are represented by the Southern Regional Education Board. I believe this is the same data, some of the same data I had before, but this is after SREB made the adjustment for the take-home salary. So the salary for Mississippi among these 16 states was $27,000. Came in 15th of these 16 states ahead of Kentucky. The ranks for the states, the salaries for the states that border Mississippi range from 6 through 12. You can see Tennessee, Louisiana, Arkansas right there together. And these salaries in the bottom table, after adjusting them for the purchasing power for 2019, are in the last table at the bottom. So after adjusting for purchasing power, the annual take-home salary in Mississippi is about $32,100, which improves it one space to 14 out of 16 states, exceeding Texas and Kentucky, and is about $640 less than the next largest state, which is Oklahoma. Of the states that border Mississippi, the only state that improves their ranking after adjusting for purchasing power in these tables is Alabama, which moves up to 3rd from 6th. And the states of Tennessee, Louisiana, and Arkansas remain ranked 10th, 11th, and 12th among the 16 states in the SREB region after we adjust for purchasing power. So to summarize, adjusting for purchasing power allows for a more direct comparison of teacher salaries or really most any type of salary as long as it's equivalent across states. So showing the different sources of salary data that I've presented here, after we adjust for purchasing power, the relative ranking of teacher salaries from Mississippi does improve, but only improves somewhat. The salaries for the other states that border Mississippi also improve as well, because they also tend to have a relatively lower cost of living than the U.S. average. So they improve in their rankings as well once we adjust for purchasing power. So, Mr. Chairman, again, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee, and I'll end my comments and be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Does any member have any questions for Dr. Miller? Mr. Miller,
Yep.
it seems here during this pandemic that wages or inflation has caused wages to increase along with the cost of items that you buy in the store, grocery store, or hardware store, or wherever. How has wages been affected? And if we do nothing to increase teachers' salaries, how is that going to help or harm them going forward in this period, I guess, the pandemic period?
Well, you're always going to have inflation. Right now, we have seen a spike in inflation for various reasons. The full reopening of the U.S. economy, the amount of money the federal government has put out into the hands of consumers in the last few months. We've also seen some supply shortages, particularly in production of automobiles. That's driven up the prices of both new and used. But long term, we see inflation coming back to about where it was before the pandemic. That's the view of the majority of economists, certainly not all economists, but the Federal Reserve keeps reiterating that they think it's transitory and that by the end of this year and early next year, we'll see a moderating of that inflation. But yes, without adjusting for inflation over time, obviously the purchasing power of the salary will decrease, because we're still going to have at least, a little inflation of 1.5% to 2% every year.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miller. I don't believe there's any other questions, and I appreciate you coming here this afternoon.
Thank you.
And then that moves us to our last presenter from the Southern Regional Educational Board, SREB. We've got in person with us, and we're glad to have him, Dr. Stephen Pruitt, who is the president, Lee Posey, who is the vice president, and on Zoom, we have Megan Boren, their policy advisor.
Good afternoon. It is so good to see 3D people. I don't know if you remember if your kids ever had to deal with Flat Stanley when they were kids. I feel like I've lived in a Flat Stanley world for the last 18 months. So it's great to actually see people. It's great to be in Mississippi. Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, thank you so much for having us come and spend some time with you today to talk about something that's very important to us. And we believe very important to the economy of our country, is making sure that we take care of our teachers. We are going to share with you some work that we've done over the last couple of years in working on this issue. I'd like to start by just making sure everybody is a little bit familiar with who we are. We are what's called an interstate compact. The way I like to share this with people is when two states build a bridge over a body of water, the two states enter an interstate compact agreement that they would both maintain and give access to the bridge. And we're sort of a metaphorical education bridge across our 16 states. Our job is to present the research to then help you as states think about how to find unique solutions to common challenges. The three things we do really, really well is we analyze and publish information. We convene and engage our stakeholders in our states. In fact, we hope that all of you will consider coming to hopefully will be our first in-person board meeting that will be coming in June in Atlanta. And then what we do, which is I think the most important part of what we do, is we support state action. So what we do with our teacher prep work, this is actually a great example of how what we refer to as the wheel works at SREB. In 2018, we did a teacher prep commission on what it would take to prepare teachers. From there, we did all the research, we brought people together, we convened them, we came up with a list of recommendations on how to improve teacher preparation, recruitment, and retention. And now we've been working in states, including Mississippi, in helping groups of individuals think through how to recruit and retain teachers. So we are very excited to be here and to be a part of that. Now, the reality is, and you've already heard a lot of really great conversation today. And I always like to tell people, education is not rocket science, because rocket science is actually easier. I mean, it really is, because once you deal with the human element, it just changes how things are. Now, maybe the fact I'm a chemist, probably not a completely fair statement to say that's easier, but I have found it to be, because there's so many different things that can change that we have to be able to address. So we have been working really closely to try to help people think about why do we have a teacher shortage, and what is the cause of it? And the reality is, we do have a teacher shortage in all of our states, in all 16 of our states. We actually are seeing teacher shortages across the country. We're starting, and all of our 16 states have major shortages in at least 3 areas. Of course, science and STEM continues to be a problem, but we see it in special ed, we see it in English language teachers. And actually, in some of our states, we're starting to see it in elementary ed, which is something that, frankly, a few years ago, I never would have thought would have been an issue. So when we think about what's causing these teacher shortages, it really boils down to a lot around the career continuum. So if you take a look here, things like limited pathways, limited recruitment, not enough on-the-job learning, inappropriate barriers to entry. I was sharing with the chairman earlier, my wife decided to become a high school physics teacher after being a pharmacist for 28 years. We learned a lot about how it makes it a little bit difficult to join the profession. Now, there's not saying that you should lower the rigor of becoming a teacher, but then there are sometimes things that we require them to do extra that may not always be the best thing to show a good teacher. License and pay based on inputs over outcomes. Now, just to be clear, we're not talking about merit pay there. We're not talking about anything like that, but it's actually about whether or not a person can walk into a classroom and make a difference in kids' lives. Low teacher autonomy, gaps in school leadership, a lack of statewide incentive for teacher leaders, a lack of career advancement, a lack of esteem for the profession. Our teachers often feel like they are not appreciated. They often feel like they are not brought to the table. But in particular, when it comes to the issues around salary, they don't feel that they are given their due. So the reality is that when we think about our teachers, obviously, everybody wants to be paid more. But we need to be clear that pay is only a piece of a larger puzzle. And I think you've heard a lot of that today. Kudos I would like to give to the committee for wanting to make a priority conversation out of teacher compensation. At SREB, we've made it pretty poignant that we don't talk about teacher salary schedules or teacher salary alone. We talk about compensation. And what we're going to share with you today is actually was put together in a really nice order. Is the group kind of batting cleanup here is to be able to provide for you a whole picture of how all of these things look. You can have the highest pay salary in the South, in the country, but if they're also having to pay a lot for insurance or paying a lot for things like retirement, then that salary can very quickly ebb away. So, in the work that we've done as we've talked to people, we've seen that really, and like I said, you've heard a lot of this today, but the 5th most frequent reasons teachers leave the profession is teacher pay. The 5th, not the 1st, It's fifth. But it is the leading cause for a shrinking pipeline to go into the profession, especially in our Gen Z population. I have a Gen Z daughter, and I can tell you that one of the things that's very important to her is how much she's getting paid. And frankly, me too, because I want to make sure that she doesn't have to come back and live with me for long periods of time. I love her dearly, but the thing is, if the state really considers increasing salaries, and certainly we think that's an important conversation to have, what we want to encourage you to do is to think more clearly about some other issues like preparation, that teachers feel good and confident when they walk into a classroom. I mean, I remember my first day in a classroom still. I remember them giving me the keys to my classroom, and I walked in and there were no kids there, and I thought, I am a teacher. And then the first day came and the kids came in and they sat down, and I walked in and went, oh my gosh, I am a teacher and I am alone. Now, I think things worked out pretty well for me. Being a chemist, usually if you just blew something up, you could at least entertain them for a little while. But a lot of our teachers, frankly, feel that they need more of that support as they go into the classroom. They need to see a place for advancement beyond just becoming an administrator. We need quality administrators, but a teacher knowing that they could actually advance their salary in ways beyond leaving the classroom, which, let's face it, a lot of us go into the classroom because we love working with students. So we're going to do a little bit deeper dive with you today. You know, there are 17 states in the U.S. that have teacher salary schedules. 12 of them are in the SREB region. 5 of the states in our region alone have schedules that don't reach $50,000, no matter what degree they hold by the 27th year. So there's a lot to take into account here, and there are big pieces of the puzzle. I think probably all of you are familiar with the fact that we published a teacher compensation report and dashboard back in 2019. And Megan is going to go through this in more detail, but in it, we take a look at the salary, we take a look at the health benefits, we take a look at the retirement, and we look at what the take-home pay is for our teachers after they pay into all those respective issues. So with that, I'm going to let Megan go deeper and share with you the things that we've learned specifically in the dashboard. Megan, are you able to hear us fine?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are the voice in the room now.
Excellent. Well, thank you for inviting us. I'm sorry I could not join you in person, but very glad you all let me join by Zoom today. As Stephen said, I'm going to cover some detail about all of our 4 sections of the dashboard, including salary, health benefits, retirement, and take home. I'm going to try not to repeat too much you heard this morning, but hopefully put everything together in a clear package. And we'll also offer you some recommendations. So I'll start with teacher salaries and some top takeaways from our research on this over the last 3 years. As of 2020, if you look at average national teacher salaries in constant dollars, teacher salaries are actually lower today than they were back in the 1980s. Salaries are not keeping up with inflation, nor are they rising above the required benefit costs to teachers, which has been resulting in net pay losses over the last few decades. The average salary for teachers in our SREB states in 2020 was $55,205. This is almost $10,000 less than the national average of $64,133. Teachers in the South are paid at nearly 21% lower on average than other professionals in similarly educated fields. This is lower than the national teacher wage penalty, which is what we call this piece of data. The national wage penalty is 19%. Average teacher salaries in 2018-19 were so low in our analysis in the teacher compensation report that 3 SREB states, West Virginia, Florida, and Mississippi, we found that mid-career teachers in those states who are listed as head of household on their tax status for a family of 4 or more can actually qualify for for 5 or more government assistance benefits. This next slide shows a screenshot from our dashboard salary map. This shows 2018-2019 data. 2019-2020 data will be posted in the next couple weeks. So we encourage folks to come back to see all of the numbers in October. This view shows regional and national averages for comparison. You can hover over this map when you're in the dashboard and see different states. I've highlighted Mississippi here. So in 2018-19, Mississippi had the 3rd lowest average starting salary in SREB region. And of course, the lowest average salary in the region in the nation, which has been discussed multiple times today. But there's a bright spot here. Mississippi was in the top 5 of our states for the highest average top salaries. It's really important here to note that while yes, Mississippi is lowest in one specific data point, average overall salaries, and that is the data point that's used most when examining teacher compensation, it is somewhat unfair to only use that data point. And we like to bring a full picture of data and examining as many data points as we can. So we will be showing you all today things like this. And in fact, Mississippi is not the lowest in all of these points around teacher compensation. And we'll keep highlighting these pieces for you.
And I think it's important to note here that you have to look at a whole picture. You can look at a specific data point and turn it into a sidebar, but if you look at a whole set of data, you can turn it into a story. And one of the things that I would give kudos to you on is looking at that full spectrum. Because just like we don't always want to see what a student can do on a single day on a test, we also don't necessarily want to look at a single data point across the spectrum.
That's right. Moving on, here's a screenshot of our Mississippi detailed page on teacher salaries. This shows a closer look at average teacher salaries by education level and for teachers overall in the state. We do mark the cost of living index so that comparisons like you just saw can be made. We also mark the teacher wage penalty, which I mentioned before. This is an analysis done by the Economic Policy Institute. And it does, it is one of the bright spots also that we want to raise up for you all. Mississippi is in fact in the top 4 of SREB states with the lowest teacher wage penalty. And again, this data point examines how much teachers are paid by weekly wages as compared with other similarly educated professionals within their own state. So the wage penalty for Mississippi here is 15.2%. In the SREB region, it's 21%. We also show on this page minimum teacher salary schedule is set in state policy. We do recommend states consider revising their teacher salary schedules, those that have them, not just increasing minimum pay. We'll go into more detail about this recommendation in just a moment. As I said, 2019-20 data is not yet available on our dashboard, but will be very soon. But we have pulled the data already and are going to share some of it with you here. In 1920, Mississippi had the 2nd lowest average teacher starting salary in the region. And this actually was moving down a spot from the year before, unfortunately. Mississippi still remains at the bottom for the region and the nation lowest average salary in 1920. But the average top salary is a data point that is not available for the 1920 school year. So unfortunately, we cannot provide a trend analysis for this data point. We do anticipate that Mississippi is still at least at or above the regional average on this piece. This chart shows you some differences. And I want to point out some numbers so you don't have to do the math on your own really quickly because these were questions this morning. But as of 1920, Mississippi is behind the region by $3,211 for average starting salary. They're behind $8,362 for overall average salary. And again, we don't have the numbers for 1920 for top salary, so cannot provide an exact there. But what I can say is if you look back 1 year to 1819, Mississippi is ahead, paying their top teachers, their most experienced teachers, more than the region by $6,258. We also are going to include in our dashboard update average salaries dating back to 2013. This chart shows some trends in average starting, overall, and top salaries in Mississippi from the last 7 years. You all have worked very hard to increase the starting salaries, the most out of these 3 data points, by over $5,400 actually in the last 7 years. But we do encourage that more work can be done to help recruit new talent and reach the regional average of nearly $40,000 in starting salary as of 2020. We have some recommendations for you all in salary. First, we start with considering to raise all salaries, of course, but especially raising the starting and mid-career teacher salaries to be more competitive in the SRB region and more competitive with other professions, especially those that are attracting young professionals who say that they are interested in teaching and survey data, but they're going to other fields such as health service fields, for instance, who may offer better pay. Our second recommendation on salaries is to consider providing teacher stipends so teachers can access and complete quality professional growth resources. The state could institute a district managed teacher stipend program for all new teachers to access quality growth supports. This could include university courses, micro-credentials, or other types of quality trainings that can help enhance the induction period for teachers. Along with this, we would recommend that the state require the State Department of Education or another entity to create a report that's somewhat similar to a consumer report, evaluating and listing the top high quality professional development resources available to teachers so that these stipends are used most wisely. Thirdly, we recommend considering instituting teacher leadership roles on a statewide basis through the state teacher licensure policy, creating advanced roles for highly effective teachers who can take on more responsibility while still teaching part-time in the classroom. These advanced roles can include teaching more students than typical teachers do, mentoring new and struggling teachers. And in fact, we find from research that teacher mentors are shown to be much more effective than mentors who have left the teaching field and are no longer in front of students every day. Many states have piloted or implemented roles like this already, but in order for this strategy to be completely effective in all districts, we encourage states to include these roles in licensure, but also to fund pay increases or bonuses for these advanced teachers in every single school district. The states who have left these pay increases up to districts have in fact exacerbated inequitable talent distribution. Higher bonuses could also be given to advanced teachers who are willing to serve in low socioeconomic or critical needs districts to help further distribute talent across Mississippi. A fourth recommendation for you all to consider is to provide funding to districts to be able to hire adequate numbers of support staff like school nurses, counselors, teachers assistants, or teacher residents. This would allow teachers to be able to focus on the key principles of their job and serving their students rather than other tasks. Also, another consideration is to create and fund teacher well-being programs or strategies to offer support to teachers, such as more planning time or to access emotional health support programs. And this could be especially effective now with the pandemic and everyone facing extra stress in their lives. I'll move on to healthcare and health benefits. Teacher health benefits from our analysis shows that generally teachers have quality coverage in most plans offered, and they generally have better coverage on average than other private professions. Health coverage costs for employee-only plans, individual plans, is much lower than what is provided typically in other professions, but as was discussed this morning, family coverage tends to cost a lot more for teachers than those in other professions by an average of $200 per month, in fact. All SREB states offer at least 2 or more state-sponsored health plan options, one being at least a PPO and the other being either an HMO or HDHP plan. Maryland's the exception to this, as they offer health benefits through their districts and not a state-level system. Tennessee has the most coverage options offered to teachers with 12 different plans offered by the state. All states offer very great coverage options for their teachers in at least some of their plans, but these are offered at very, very different costs to teachers via premiums. This next slide shows my dashboard screenshot. Mississippi, of course, offers 2 options to teachers in health plans, which you all learned this morning. And premium costs are very low for individuals. In 1819, you see here, they were $0 and $39 for the 2 plan options. 2020, they were $0 and $41. And in 2021, those increased only slightly again. Mississippi's individual premiums are actually tied in the region as some of the most affordable. But the family premiums, of course, are significantly high, putting a large burden on teachers who have to cover their spouse and children. And it's over $600 per month in 1819, rising to $648 for the HMO plan in 2020, and up to $671 for the 2021 plan. In 2021, 10 states in the SREB region offer significantly low family health benefits to teachers than Mississippi. Mississippi and 5 other states have the highest family premiums, costing these premiums in those states cost between $598 and up to $1,300 a month. Texas is the most expensive. The SREB states with the lowest family premium costs are actually Delaware, Florida, Virginia, and then followed by Alabama. You may have noticed, actually go back here, you may notice here that we do have flexible benefits marked. A red X means that districts may cover these flexible benefits like vision and dental. So in Mississippi, that's the case. It's an option to districts to cover those. The green check means that they are covered in the state health plan. 9 SREB states offer vision and dental to teachers in all of their plan options, and the remaining states in our region leave it up to district choice. And again, popping up here regional averages for some comparison. We do offer one improvement strategy here for you all to consider. We recommend increasing the state's contribution in order to lower the employee family premium cost to teachers. But as you talked about this morning, your health system is a combined system for all public employees. So perhaps instead consider offering a health benefit stipend to teachers in the system as part of a pay package to avoid separating the plans and potentially costing more to the state in administrative costs. Next, I'll move on to retirement. All states in our region, of course, offer pension plans, or also known as defined benefit plans. As of 2020, 10 SREB states offered multiple pension tiers that differ upon hire date. 3 states in our region have not moved to tiered plans, and that includes Arkansas, Georgia, and North Carolina. 5 states in the SREB region offer what is known as defined contribution plans, which of course are investment plans that are similar to 401ks, or they offer hybrids with pensions and 401ks put together. West Virginia is one state that used to have a defined contribution plan and have now closed it to new hires since 2005. And then as of 2022, Kentucky will become the 6th state in SREB to have passed and will be offering a defined contribution option to new hires. Most states provide these as plan options. Teachers can still opt into a pension plan if they choose. However, Tennessee is the one state in our region that requires all new hires to enter into a hybrid plan. Not all teachers will actually be able to save more for retirement in pension plans than in those contribution or investment plan options. Studies from places like Teacher Pensions pensions.org, as well as multiple state retirement systems, show that contribution plans can allow teachers, on average with 8 years of service or less, to save more for retirement. And in fact, the Florida study shows that teachers in their state with 30 years or more of service can also save for more in retirement with an investment plan similar to 401k. In many states, teachers have no choice in their retirement benefits or their investments. Some states offer teachers more control over those investments, which is typically better for teachers who don't stay in the profession as long in their entire career. And it's also a very attractive piece for teachers in younger generations, as survey data shows that they prefer a more portable plan that they have more control over. So Mississippi, of course, has multiple tiers for their defined benefit plan, and this is the same plan for all state employees. We show here a screenshot with some information about one specific tier, and you can view the rest of the tiers on the dashboard. Mississippi does not offer a defined contribution plan option. We collect information like the pension benefit formula, contribution rates, employer normal cost rate, which you heard about this morning. So I won't go over that again. And adequacy of pension savings, which is an analysis by Bellwether to show how many years it takes for a teacher to actually make more in their pension than what they put in themselves. I'll pull up regional averages here so you can see. Also have some analysis of total contribution to benefits and unfunded liabilities. With our dashboard update this fall, we're also going to be including a new calculation, which is the typical gross annual pension benefit for an average teacher who retires at age 65 with 30 years of service. In Mississippi, in 2020, that calculation equals $40,237 for a gross annual benefit, and that exceeds the regional average of $39,100. We offer two improvement ideas here for retirement benefits. We recommend that you consider lowering the number of years required in the vesting period for the newer tiers in the system as a key retention tool for teachers. We realize that this is a very difficult recommendation as your system applies to all folks, all public employees. But a second recommendation that could be a recruitment tool as well as potentially a retention tool is to consider offering a new plan of defined contribution or similar to a 401k option. This option could be an attractive choice for younger teachers, of course, as well as some older teachers. And it can save the state money because these plans actually cap future unfunded liabilities. Moving on to take-home pay. So we rounded out our analysis on our dashboard of teacher compensation with what an average teacher in each state can bring home in their first, 15th, and 35th years of teaching to show examples of net salaries. To calculate these, we deducted state-specific retirement contributions that are required of each teacher. We deducted health insurance premiums and deducted federal and state taxes. Assumptions were made for these calculations, including a typical marital status and family status. First-year teachers, we assume that they are single with no children. Mid-career and veteran teachers, we assume that they are either married or have children. These assumptions are detailed in the dashboard if you're curious to have more of that information. The calculations for Mississippi, though, are viewed here on the screen. This is a screenshot from the dashboard. After health, retirement, state and federal taxes are deducted in 2019, you can see that Mississippi's annual gross and annual net pay is lower for new teachers, as well as mid-career teachers in the region. Due to high health premium deductibles for teachers covering their families, the typical mid-career teacher will take home less than $2,000 more than a typical new hire. Teachers on the verge of retirement have an average annual gross salary that is higher than the regional average. We shared that earlier, but again, due to high health family premium costs, their net is bumped all the way down to being lower than the regional average. In 2020, new data shows that net annual salaries in Mississippi will go up to $26,581 for first-year teachers, $29,679 for mid-career teachers. And unfortunately, because we don't have the data for top average salaries, we cannot calculate a comparable data point for 35th year teachers. And all these are shocking numbers to us, that a Mississippi teacher potentially serving 15 years, especially one that could be a single parent, is taking home a wage that can barely cover housing, utilities, and food. Here we summarize all the recommendations that we've provided for you all so far on salaries, health benefits, and retirement. We recommend strengthening the investments across the board for teachers to show their value, as they are the #1 factor in improving education and student growth. The pay should increase, but we also recommend that states be strategically re-envisioning the pay schedules to address teacher recruitment, retention, and quality. And on that note, we have one more comprehensive solution for you all to consider today. We encourage states to consider full revisions to their state teacher salary schedule policies. Currently, the schedules in most states increase wages based on inputs like education or degree obtained or license obtained, and the years of service that a teacher puts in. These 2 points do not always correlate with effective practice. While some research shows that more time on the job or a higher degree can lead to increased effectiveness for some teachers, it is definitely not the case across the board. Instead, we encourage states to revise the salary schedule and the teacher licensure policy together to reward and incentivize positive outcomes for teachers and students. The salary and licensure policies are 2 mechanisms that state leaders have to show what they value in education. And we propose a paradigm shift to you all to align these state policies to your values of growth and improvement in education. Teachers should be licensed and compensated for advancing in their instructional and content skills, their knowledge, their competencies, and increasing positive student engagement and impact with the students that they teach. Many states are moving to incorporating outputs-based measures like these in their licensure systems and have been for a decade. North Carolina is currently undergoing a process to completely redesign their licensure and teacher compensation policies in this way. And once completed, they'll actually be the first in the nation to fully do so. Along with the salary schedule revision, we of course encourage raising salaries, but along with this, a full examination of in-state wages in comparison with other professionals, so that these raises can be balanced with competing with other professions like health services or others that are kind of stealing away your teachers, so to speak, and determining a more appropriate starting wage to help increase the interest in the profession. We also encourage states to consider creating a statewide teacher residency role and license. We know that Mississippi has a pilot on this, but we encourage states to do teacher residency statewide and create a formal license for these roles, but also to pay these residents a salary and benefits as a key attraction tool, and to help build the pipeline of new teachers who will have long-term on-the-job training before they teach a class of their own. Also, as mentioned before, we encourage creating and licensing advanced teacher roles statewide for master and mentor teachers, and including pay levels for these licenses within the state salary schedule. We also encourage considering that the salary schedule incentivizes increases in skills and competencies as well as these responsibilities, and of course, giving bonuses to highly effective teachers who are willing to teach in low socioeconomic areas. Lastly, we would like to encourage you all to think of, instead of providing yearly step increases based on years served, to consider building in legislated annual cost of living increases, and also offering pay increases for licensure renewal if and when the teacher licensure system is revised to be based on growth in skills, competencies, and in positive student engagement and impact. Now I'll turn it back over, Stephen, to you to wrap us up.
Thank you, Megan. So, again, just want to reiterate that this is a systemic effort. One of the things that's really hard for any of you as policymakers is to think about this whole thing systemically, because you've got a massive system that you have to deal with. And it's not just education, it's all across the board. We recognize that. But in thinking about specifically recruiting and retaining quality instruction, quality teachers, playing with one part of the system means you may impact that part of the system, but it may also have impacts in other parts of the system. So for us, we really encourage you to think about this, not just as a salary increase, but also think about prep and pathways. How do we help get teachers to the classroom? Teacher supports, what are we doing for them while they're there? And licensure, how do we help them get into the profession and ensure that they are doing a quality job in the classroom? And of course, compensation as well. Just to put a little bit of a finer point on this, I don't believe this is necessarily an education issue. I believe this is a workforce issue. It is something that is much larger. We have entered a fourth industrial revolution. We are in a time now where computers and artificial intelligence and automation no longer learn from us, they actually learn with us. What that translates to is the fact that our workforce is going to significantly change over the next decade. In fact, if things remain unchanged, we are predicting that we may see as many as 18 million unemployable adults by 2030. COVID accelerated that by potentially as much as 5 years. And you may be going, what does this have to do with teacher compensation? Well, if we don't have quality teachers in the classroom to help our students go beyond just the memorization of facts and actually into the application of material, our populace will not be able to get a job. They will be unemployable because they won't have the skills that are necessitated in this fourth industrial revolution. So we want to give kudos and thanks to the committee for taking this issue on, for letting us be a small part of the conversation. We literally exist to support you. We were created in 1948 by legislators and governors to help you. So please feel free to contact us for anything that we could do to support the effort. We will give you the facts. They may not always be what you like to want to hear, but it's going to be what we know about the research and about the conversations that we've heard around the South and the country. But in parting, or as we go to questions, if you have any, remember that no great education idea ever died in the vision phase. It dies in implementation. And a lot of times the reason for that is because we don't think about things as a full systemic package. So kudos to you for taking this on. Thank you for what you do for the state of Mississippi and its students and its teachers. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Dr. Pruitt. I think your group kind of wrapped up everything we've discussed here today, but I want to recognize Senator Jordan, who has a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Are we considering gender as well? Because I find these days we don't have enough male instructors in the classroom, and you don't have enough physics and chemistry instructors in the classroom. There's a shortage. Mm-hmm. And that has something to do with how effective our education system is. Discipline is one thing that most people, teachers, run away from. those children running me crazy. But as a chemistry major, and you say you're a physics major, I found that it was I always enjoyed teaching at that time. But there were more men in the classroom. Now, men are gone, and ladies, in some way, may not be able to control those classes where you're dealing with chemicals as well as other things in the classroom, where you're dealing with the systems of the human body, and so forth. So I would like, in some way, if possible, see more males in the classroom to help our students.
I think it's a great point. I would actually even expand that to say that we also don't have enough teachers of color and teachers who come from homes of poverty. We know that students who see people who remind them of themselves see opportunity.
Well,
And I think there's also a systemic issue, and this is not a Mississippi specific thing. I think this is a national thing, where often teacher salaries are seen as a second income. In other words, it's not the primary income for a household. And as a result, you end up seeing lower salaries than, say, me, who has a doctorate in chemistry, could go work for DuPont and probably make a lot more money than I could as a teacher. So you end up with a lot of mission-driven people becoming educators. But there's sort of an underlying aspect of, if we want to recruit more males, I think that we've got to look at teacher compensation as a primary source for household income, as opposed to sort of a secondary source.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Jordan. Senator Hobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Pruitt. Good to see you here. And I think I will see you on Zoom Monday, possibly.
Yes.
You and Lee. So looking forward to that. But I had several, and I do have a few questions I want to ask you about some of the data that's been presented by you today and some of the things we've seen earlier and talked about. I think as our chairman rightfully said, I think you've brought together a lot of the things that we've already discussed today and help answer some of the questions that we've had going along. So I thank you for that. But I do want to get to a few of those. But one of the last things you said was the change in workforce. And I'm paraphrasing what you said, essentially that we need good teachers to get away from just the memorization and teach our students how to apply application. I'm taking it in my mind was get away from memorization, get to application.
Yeah.
Am I paraphrasing that fairly correctly?
Very well, very well.
And I do, this is really apart from what we're talking about today, but I have concerns. I think a lot of my colleagues have concerns that unfortunately we've probably spent too much time and too much emphasis on memorization and less on application. And are you looking, as SREB, looking at any studies, or do you have any data that would support the change? You know, right now in Mississippi, we essentially take one test at the end of the year, and I hear this term utilized that we're teaching the test, or we're teaching students. And frankly, I'll say, if I were a superintendent or principal, I'd probably spend a lot of time trying to train my students to take the test if that's the way my school is going to be assessed or my district's going to be assessed. But are you looking at any data now that would help our districts get better at application and less on memorization, and something that would help us as we go forward, maybe shifting what we need to do through our Department of Education and through policy in the legislature to make that move that we see our world going?
That's a great question. My simple answer is follow the research. And the research has been pretty clear that, obviously we want quality assessments, and I will be just full disclosure. I do believe that a state assessment is important to evaluate the fairness and the equity of instruction across multiple districts. However, when we make that such a big part of an accountability system, that overrides all the other aspects. And under the Every Student Succeeds Act, every state had the opportunity to look at other school indicators beyond just the assessment. So when we look at the research, everything from the RAND Corporation to the International PISA exam, the research supports the fact that if we teach students how to apply, even if they take a what I would consider a lower quality test that is basically mounted in just memorization, that they still perform excellent on that. But it's because they were able to apply that information. A lot of people think that when you apply information, you don't still learn, the 4 phases of mitosis. The difference is, I don't think any of you have sat here today and thought, I wonder what phase of my cells are in. And does anybody even know what anaphase is, really?
Senator Jordan knows that.
He
but
said
go
maybe
on.
him, yeah. But if all we do is say we're going to do the 4 phases of mitosis, and we don't talk about why cell division actually helps an organism survive. I mean, let's face it, if mitosis works, you live, and if it doesn't, you die. That's a pretty big idea, right? So when you're teaching that, you still teach those 4 phases of mitosis, but you also have to teach why it matters. And unfortunately, it is one of those things that when we develop an accountability system where the assessment plays such a large role, it becomes, it's almost anti the common thought that I'm going to drill and kill these kids. But what that does is it might get them past that test, but that same group of kids is going to have trouble the next year and the next year. But what our research shows is actually, if you do a good job of really teaching application at an appropriate level, obviously, set a cold bottle of water on a table and it starts to sweat. Well, it's not really sweating, but a K5 kid could look at that and say, you know what, there's something smaller than the eye can see, an atom. A middle school kid can start talking about, oh, well, there's forces that affect those things. And so they come together and cause those beads. A high school kid can then talk about the actual forces that go on between those things. That same thing could be done all 3 places, but abstract thought or problem solving in all 3 of those levels can do the same thing. Sorry for all the science examples, but that's my thing. But this is a thing I'm rather passionate about, is I believe that assessment is necessary, but I also believe it's like what we talked about with this. It's a part of what should be done when we look at the quality of a school. I think accountability should be both a flashlight and a spotlight. It should be a flashlight on the dark things that need to be exposed, but it should also be a spotlight that says we do some really good things in public education.
Okay, thank you. A few other questions, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Pruitt, one of the things we look at in Mississippi for determination of allocating funds is the ADA, average daily attendance. Do most states use some similar formula, or are there a variety of formulas utilized?
It's a variety. Actually, I just did that presentation for the Kentucky legislature a couple of weeks ago. Happy to come back if you'd like to see that too. But it varies. There are some that do it based on ADA. There are some that still do it based on the number of rear ends in a seat on a particular day and afternoon. And then there are some that do it based on enrollment. And there's always a good argument to be done for all of those. Obviously, if you're doing it based on enrollment, you can be concerned about, well, how many kids are actually enrolled versus how many are actually coming. I think one of the bigger concerns often in school funding is that it's done in arrears. So it's hard if your school funding for this year is based on how many kids showed up last year. But it really, my advice to you, if you wanted to take a look at that, is don't focus on the ADA part of it first. What we recommend is look at what do you want your funding system to do first, and then back it down from there. ADA may work fine. Enrollment may work fine. But like I said, it's so complex. And I mean, I always have joked that when it comes to funding formulas, it was the original idea of the designated survivor. You got 3 people in every state that understands it, and those 3 can never ride in the same car, because, I was state superintendent in Kentucky, and we always used to joke that we can't have Robin and Charlie and Shan all in the same car because we're going to be in a world of hurt.
Understood. Let me move on to supplements. You heard some of the discussion, or may have heard some of the discussion about local supplements. Should I assume that most states have local supplements or something similar to that? And do you have problems with the local supplements that oftentimes it's the wealthier districts that have more money to offer in supplements, and the poorer districts have less money, and you just exacerbate the problem because a lot of your better teachers or teachers that are able may move into the wealthier districts, and it creates more separation. Is that fairly common you see in most southern states?
I think so. I'm going to make one comment, then I'm going to see if Megan wants to dive a little deeper on that. You know, it's just logic. You know, you've got a supply and demand issue. And if you are in a really rural district that doesn't have a lot of industry, doesn't have a heavy tax base, it's harder to offer much more of a supplement. However, I would also say that's where it's going to be important that as states, we think about how do we build those industries up in those areas, because ultimately, especially our Gen Zers, it's hard to get them to convince. They may be very mission driven, may be willing to go somewhere for a lower pay, but they also don't want to go somewhere where they can't go see a movie on Friday night or go to a club or whatever. So I think that I think that's a pretty common issue that we see, but helping with the overall experience of teaching, I think has an effect there too. There was a time we had a distribution problem more so than a shortage. I know that when I was at the Georgia Department of Education, we had a time where literally every chemistry and physics certified teacher lived inside of 285. And they didn't go to Twiggs County. They didn't go to South Georgia. Now we have a bigger problem because we have a distribution problem with low numbers already. Megan, do you want to talk to the local supplement at all?
Sure. Everything you said is spot on, Stephen. I'll just add that we encourage states to be very strategic and to study all of the additions that they may make to teachers via stipends to encourage folks to go to critical needs or low socioeconomic areas. We find that offering extra stipends for teachers to go to these areas across the board, carte blanche, are not working in many states who have studied this. And in fact, really strategically placing those extra stipends onto more populations of teachers who are highly effective. Typically, these are older teachers with families who are more settled and don't mind going necessarily to more rural areas in the state. Also, any strategies that you do, be sure to have the mechanisms to collect the data and determine if they are working. In some states, they're finding certain strategies are working in very specific areas, and they're not working in other areas of the state. So it's sort of a test and see kind of situation, and we just encourage that that study mechanism to be there.
Yeah, in fact, I was part of when I was at the Georgia Department of Education, I was part of a group that put in a science and math initiative that new teachers started at year 3 salary. If they went to more rural areas, they eventually abandoned it because it wasn't enough to attract to the more rural areas. So it really is about a bigger picture of do they feel confident and do they feel good about being in a particular area? Don't get me wrong, they want to be paid too, but it's more of a draw than just the salary.
We've tried and continue to try those things to get some of our teachers to go to the areas that need them the most. And I know it's a challenge, but let me just, rather than ask any more questions, because I don't want to monopolize the time, but I would like to get some additional data from y'all, from you, Lee and Megan, if I could, on that issue and issues about other states, because as we're comparing this, I want to see how we compare on things like the National Board Certified Teachers pay that we've got, and EEF funding that we've got. I think earlier MD talked about moving expenses and other stipends or programs and bonuses. If I could get that data, I'd sure like to look at that as we're trying to compare what we do. And so we make sure we've got a full picture. We've talked about retirement and health insurance, but I want to look at the rest of it too, to make sure we're getting good stuff. So I thank you for your time. I look forward to being with you on Zoom soon. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hobson. Senator Bryan.
Before we go too far down the road of denouncing memorization. I just want to put in a good word for the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. Half a millennium ago, half a world away, and there's not a better description of springtime in the English language. But moving right along, there was a discussion about funding formulas. And I would just make a couple of comments about how our existing funding formula was designed to address some of those circumstances. The comment was made that we needed to figure out what we wanted to fund and how, and then sort of work backwards to ADA. And that's what we did. The existing funding system was designed based on how much money it would take to operate a school district. And then later it was basically translated into ADA. The other question that's been raised about property poor districts and rural districts, which tend to be the same, although not always, but there's a great deal of overlap. By having a local contribution of 28 mils to the amount that the school district was to receive, you captured at least some of the ad valorem from the wealthier districts with a 28 mil contribution. But you did not give a disincentive to local districts. They got to keep everything in addition to 28 mils that they levied. But that meant that if you were a property poor district, you got more money because you put up only 28 mils and the state funded the difference. So that for the first 28 mils of ad valorem, which would be about, I'll say, half of the total ad valorem levy in the state, it didn't matter what district you were in, you got the same amount of money. The other thing that we did, going back to the concept of funding districts, is we realized that people in economically poor districts, not property poor districts, but economically poor districts, had a tougher go of it. So what we did was we had a very small increase in the funding formula for economically poor districts. The way that we determined that was to look at the number of children who were receiving free lunch. We did that because, number one, it was a very good proxy for how poor the students were that were going to your school. Number two, it was being collected for other purposes, so that minimized the ability to manipulate that. And so you got an additional 5% for each one of those students. That was referred to as the at-risk formula, or the at-risk feature. It was not for at-risk programs. We wrote the district a check. And this is important because if you're sending cash to the districts that you're talking about, assuming you can do anything with money, which is a question, but if a district wishes to pay an extra 20 grand to get a chemistry teacher or to get a math teacher or whatever, they at least would have some additional money at their disposal to do that with. What has happened to Mr. Chairman, and this is, I think, important to what we're talking about. Think for a minute. If you are a property poor district, a bigger percentage of your revenue is going to come from the state, from the adequate education formula, than if you're a property rich district. Of course, you're going to get to keep your 28%. But when the formula is not fully funded, what we have chosen to do, which I think is a mistake, but what we've chosen to do is have an across the board cut. So if you cut 3% of the money from a property-rich district, they've still got their relatively high 28%. But when you cut 3% from a property-poor district, it has a bigger effect on that district than for a property-rich district. The other thing we've done, we're going to do to help all districts, but property-poor districts and poor districts in particular, was way back when we passed a 1 cent sales tax for education. We had $10 million a year going to the public school building fund. An additional $10 million a year diverted to districts to be used for capital improvements. And we also had money for school supplies, which are going to teachers, which was thought to be, and I think as a practical sense, does actually help put money in teachers' pockets, because teachers have an uncontrollable impulse to spend their own money to get stuff for their children. You can't keep them from doing it. And so at least there would be some attempt to get some revenue they could do that with. But fairly quickly, I remember Senator Gordon explaining to the Senate that although we would not be funding the public school building funds, that we would be giving the districts the flexibility to use some other state money to do that with, which was the equivalent, as I said at the time, of going down to the bank and saying, well, I know I've got a car payment and I know I've got a house payment, but I'm going to make one payment instead of two, but I'll give you, Mr. Banker, the flexibility to apply my payment however you want to. I don't think the banker would buy that. And the schools weren't real carried away with that either. But I mentioned that since we've gotten off on this discussion of funding formulas, there were some features to the funding formula that we have on the books that were to alleviate these problems, not the least of which was, can we get some cash to the property poor districts and the economically poor districts, so maybe they can have some amount of money to do something with that the rich districts do as a matter of course. And I apologize for babbling on, but it's all Senator Hobson's fault. He started it.
I think that side of the room is the problem, maybe, huh? Thank you, Senator Bryan. Senator Wiggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I'm not as eloquent as Senator Bryan.
Well, who is?
Not many.
I am too.
I'm sorry.
I am too.
In your presentation, there's a stat, if I heard it right, it said there are 17 states that do a salary schedule and 12 of those are in SREB READ. So if my math is correct, even though I'm a lawyer, I think that's 33 other states don't have a schedule. So what do those other states do? And then why is the 17 that have it, the 3/4 of them all in basically the South? So what is it about the South that we do it that way? So my first question is, what do the 33 other states do? Second, why is it that located in the South?
Megan, do you want us to take the first shot at that?
Sure. Yes, so the stat is correct. 17 states in the country have a teacher salary schedule set in state law, 12 in the SRV region. The 4 states in our region who do not have a salary schedule leave it up to districts, and that's what all of the other states in the country do who do not have a salary schedule set by the state. It is up to districts to set it. Some states have some parameters for districts on what those salary schedules can look like. Some states at least set a minimum salary level that cannot be, a district cannot go under, but some states don't even do that. Why is it based mostly in the South? That's an excellent question. I had that question myself 2 years ago in looking into all of this. I found through some digging that in fact it is a policy that was heavily instituted during the desegregation phase of our country. Teacher salary schedules were implemented by a lot of states at that time. And those teacher salary schedules were set to be based on mostly on education obtained, and then of course with years of service. And that was actually, in fact, a strategy used by a lot of states to pay white, more educated teachers more than minority teachers that had less education.
Didn't expect that answer, but okay. So we're, just to clarify, so we're, the structure under which we continue to have a debate and we continue to do is a 50-year, at least a 50-year-old, it's based in 50-year-old history, which goes to my point about the bureaucracy that I was making earlier. Okay. And then based on that answer, there's some, let's just say 60-year-old biases that are built in. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes.
Okay. So that being said, the district, the states that do it by district, and then the ones that do it, is there one more inequitable than the other? So, and I'm using equitable in the general sense, not like a math sense. So those other states, if they do it by district, is it a more equitable and fair way to do things?
No, not necessarily. I would say both have equal ability to be just as inequitable as the other. States who have a state minimum teacher salary schedule, they are just setting the minimums. Districts then still have very similar discretion to reset those salary schedules by putting supplements on them. It all falls to essentially how much money those districts have from the various funding sources. And really that's the same across every single state in our country. So no, I would not say that there is more or less inequities in district salary schedules if there's a state plan or not. It really comes down to how those districts are funded.
Okay. And then really just two more questions. In looking at, actually, this is kind of a combined question. In looking at the take-home pay of your breakdown there, and your data is showing that the mid-career teachers are the ones, Mississippi's not in line, correct? Okay, and to my earlier point, is it not correct that your mid-year is generally when they have the family? So if they're starting right out of college, they don't have the family obligations because you're whatever 20. Most people don't get married, if we're looking at it that way, 27 or something. Am I right in saying that?
Yes.
Megan, you can give more detail about how we came up with those calculations, but yeah, I mean, that's part of the assumption is come out of college and you're single. It's, you know, you don't have some of the obligations that you would at the mid.
Well, I can testify that having children is expensive.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So then when you're either single or it's just two people, okay, let's just say that. All right. So we're behind on that, but this leads to my other question, which is I find myself in a predicament because I'm coming at this from an appropriation standpoint. Okay. And I think this number is somewhat accurate, but when we did the $1,000 raise across the board, that basically equated to a $53 million when you included the benefits, $53 million statewide to the budget going forward. Okay. But at the end of the day, there's only so much money to go around. So it seems to me there's a little bit of downward pressure. So if the answer is, hey, let's just raise it up to the average salary, well, that's all fine and good, but that could translate into I don't know, $200 million increase going forward every year. Am I accurate in saying that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of why I don't envy the work that you guys have to do because, you know, you don't get to print money. You know,
No.
you've got to
And
go.
we
with-
balance the budget unlike the federal side of our
Right.
government.
And so you've got to deal with a finite amount of money. And that's one of the reasons why when we come in, we talk about dealing with things as a system, because you may not, I mean, I got this question when I was in Kentucky a few weeks ago, what would it cost to fully fund education? Probably more than anybody, actually any state could have. So that's why you end up with sometimes an allocation formula more than a funding formula. But there's an aspect of that is the reality, especially in a COVID world that you're dealing with revenue, that you have a finite amount of money. So it's one thing to say, well, let's just raise all the salaries. It's another to say, well, what if we did this with the salaries, but we also did a couple of these other things that kind of help balance making the field of education feel more professionalized. So I mean, everybody wants more money, but there's also the realities that every state legislature has to work within of what revenue you have, what revenue you have available, what are all the competing priorities that you're having to deal with as a legislature. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I tend to think about this more in terms of a workforce issue than an education only issue, because there's a bigger thing at stake here than just the salaries. And one of the things that you guys have to grapple with is, I've got this finite amount of money, but I do have other policy levers that I could look at as well. And so how could you look at that across the coastline, so to speak? Megan, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I'll just say it definitely is going to be a case of picking and choosing. But definitely agree to really step back and try and look at this strategically from a holistic standpoint of salaries plus benefits, as well as what are some other things if you are running out of money that you can do to show teachers respect and appreciation, to give them career advancement options, to give them more support. Those things are just as, if not more valuable to many teachers than salary increases that are not significant, such as $1,000 or a couple $1,000s a year. Strategically placing increases can be very key to what you want to accomplish. Do you want to retain more teachers? Do you want to retain more highly effective teachers? Or instead, do you prioritize recruiting more teachers into the field? That will help you make some of these decisions as to where to put the limited funds that you do have. And then I'll also say, as part of the analysis, and I realize this is very complicated, but it's really important to look at what these large investments will buy you in the future. If you are able to increase the esteem of the profession, you're able to end these teacher shortages, or at least reduce them greatly, and provide a much stronger education for your students, how much are you going to save every generation onward? These students getting a better education, being able to achieve more in their lifetime, and also get more jobs, more livable wages themselves. There's tons of studies showing how much that saves in other sorts of programs that you have to pay for, and other consequences, so to speak. What you have to pay for if you do not have an educated population and workforce. So I would very much encourage that you all include that in your assessment, and be able to maybe make some tough decisions that will pay off in the next 10, 15, 20 years or more.
Okay, and you reminded me of my last question. Do y'all have data when the teachers leave the profession? At what point, like, is it after 10 years? Is it after, because the numbers you're showing is like a 35-year teacher, okay? My guess is they actually, because of all of what we've been hearing, they leave the profession. Do we know when that is?
I think that varies. Megan, do you have those research studies that we could get him?
Yes, I do have some data on that. I can tell you in the South, in the SREB region, it averages out to 45% of teachers actually leave before they hit year 5. That comes from culminating most of our states, not all 16 though, to be completely transparent on that. And Mississippi, in fact, we did try and pull some of this data for work with the task force. There are limitations to Mississippi systems currently, and so we do not have available attrition rates for the state, but I can provide them for other states, and I can provide some other statistics on the teacher workforce to give you at least somewhat of a picture.
That would be great if you could do that.
Yeah, we
I'm
can do
sorry, that could have led me to a whole bunch of other questions and stuff, but if basically almost 50% leave the profession after 5 years,
Before they hit 5 years, actually.
before 5 years.
Yeah, again, that's why I consider it a workforce issue more than an education issue. I will share with you. 'Cause
Right.
It made me think, as she was answering that question, when we go back to the idea of whether it's just salaries, other things like, especially induction during those 5 years becomes really important. So when I was in Kentucky, we had area technical centers spread out throughout the state, and all of those reported to me. And for the first couple of years, I mean, we were having people leave, after a month. And these were industry people, welders, advanced manufacturing, that were teaching career and technical education courses. And they would come in and sometimes leave really quickly. We actually, and this is, please don't misinterpret, I'm sorry. They encountered students, yes. Yes, but the way they were being inducted at that time was not, they basically were going to sit in a class and sitting and listening to people talk. And what I'm going to tell you, this is not a commercial for SREB, because it was before I came to SREB, but we actually adopted the Teach to Lead program, which was a 3-year induction model. And I went from a 60% retention rate to in just over a year and a half to a 90% retention rate. Just simply because we weren't just throwing them into the classroom with students. They were going through, how do you do project-based learning? How do you manage school discipline? But most of all, had a mentor that they could talk to that made them feel more empowered in the work they were doing. So that's another aspect of this that's relatively inexpensive to do, that's beyond just the salary schedule issue.
Senator Boyd.
My question was actually the information just a little bit that you brought up. I was on a working group and we were looking at those advanced roles for teachers. And we have some of those roles in our local districts do it. And then we have some programs kind of on a statewide from the State Department, but we don't have a really systemic statewide system. Can you point us to some of the states and give us the information and some of the states that y'all think do a really great job of that?
We can do that. Megan, do you want to speak to that specifically?
Sure. I can already point you to Arkansas, who's built those roles into their state licensure system. There's a couple other states who've done that, Tennessee, a couple others. I can get that list to you all. North Carolina has a very strong pilot on this, and it actually was built out of a program called Opportunity Culture, which is from a nonprofit group called Public Impact. They have a very excellent, and most see that as one of the best teacher leadership programs, and they also teach districts how to fund those teacher leadership roles, which is very key. So we can put all that into follow-up for you.
And if I remember correctly, and I'm going to look at Lee in case I'm saying this incorrectly, but Maryland has actually just undergone a massive education reform. And I believe as part of that reform, they have created a teacher advancement schedule. I'm right on that, correct?
Thank you. Senator Polk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Pruitt. I, like you, am so glad to have you in the room. I can do so much better watching somebody than watching them on TV. My question goes to basically where Senator Wiggins was, and I appreciate him opening this door. And I think we said that 45% of our teachers leave the profession in the first 5 years. The data that you collected that told us that salary was it the fourth or fifth important thing in retention? I'm assuming that data came from every teacher every age, every experience level. If we drill down and removed it and started asking only those teachers in their first 5 years, I would have to assume that list would change. Would that be correct, or do you have that data?
I don't know that we have that specific data. Megan, I don't know if you've had that in your reading or not. I mean, I think it would change some, certainly. I mean, because like I said, everybody wants to be paid more. But I also, from all the research studies I've read, it is often in the entire encapsulation of what the profession is about. So yes, of course, they want to be paid more, but they also want to feel valued. They want to feel comfortable and safe in their school building. They want to feel that, I still feel like I owe a letter of apology to every kid I taught my first 2 years. Because after a while, I'm like, I didn't have a clue what I thought I did at the time, but then I was like, oh, I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. And I think that the encapsulation of what I consider the greatest and most noble profession, no offense to any of you who are not educators, but I think the education is it is that literally that career that starts all the others, and people want to feel that way. Part of it is salary, and they want to feel that recognition that their time has been worth it. But I also think that there are other aspects of being a teacher that keep them in that profession beyond that. Megan, what do you want to add to that?
Sure, I'll go back and look at these studies. There are many from multiple sources and see if they give enough data to show different responses by experience level. I'm not sure that they do, but if we can find it, we'll provide it. Another quick thing I want to say, just as a previous point, I do have some federal data that I've collected, I just pulled up, that shows from teacher surveys, how many plan to leave the profession within the next 5 years. For Mississippi in 2018, that rate was 13.5%, which is above the national average of 12.3% from that particular study.
So where I'm headed is this. Are we maybe needing to look at a difference between the entering teacher and the teacher that has been with us over 5 years in the way we look at benefits and salary? In Mississippi, nobody has ever said we don't have enough benefits. They always say, I don't make enough money. So would we be better off looking at a possibility of increasing starting teacher pay for the first 5 years and saying you're not going to be part of PERS until after your 5th year? Because to them, salary might be more important than retirement. I know in the business I'm in, when I'm trying to hire an employee, we talk salary. And then when I go to 401k and group health, it glazes over. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference because young people need money. They're not even thinking about benefits. Has any state looked at the possibility of reducing benefits for the first 5 years and increasing salary for those people?
I don't know that I know of any. Megan might know of some. I mean, my advice to you on that would be, or at least my experience has been, I think anything can be part of the conversation, but I would encourage you just to have the conversation. I think that's one of those things. If you were to go to that, I would encourage you to bring in some educators to get a feel from them and get a feel for those new teachers coming in, as well as, because as we all know, educators are a bunch that can get really riled up really quickly. And figuring out how to manage what is going to be best usually means that they have a seat at that table to have that conversation. So that would be my biggest advice, is if you were to go down that road, have kind of a kitchen cabinet that you could talk to about that. Megan, anything you know of with that?
Yes. There are some states who are certainly making moves to lessening retirement benefits for new teachers, mostly through those tiered plans and pension benefits. There are some states who are also capping certain benefit aspects. So new hires are not receiving certain pieces that maybe veteran teachers have received previously. I would not recommend that you not offer retirement to new teachers. While younger professionals maybe don't have that top of mind or understand it completely, they do still, all survey data shows, still want retirement and would consider that not good to not have that option. But I would look to what we recommended in our slides of offering a defined contribution plan, which is like a 401k. The states who offer that do pay in less, and they also are able to cap the unfunded liabilities. So there's a great cost savings to states. And a lot of newer, younger professionals want to choose those 401k plans. If they're advertised well and explained well, many will choose those, and it will be able to be a big cost savings for the states. And the teachers will see that as a benefit because those are portable plans they can take with them, and they can control them more by determining which investments they want to put those in. And that's all from survey data that Gen Z, as well as millennials like myself, prefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Pope. Senator Bryan?
There was a comment earlier about relatively few people in each state fully understanding the funding formula. I just want everyone to know that when Todd Ivy retired, he was immediately placed into protective custody. He's been held in an undisclosed location since then, and that's our backup.
And Senator Bryan, you cannot fly at any point whatsoever.
I know that SREB has data about what percentage of funding comes from state and local levels as you go from state to state. But one of the things that I've come to realize in looking at formulas in funding is that different states have different philosophies about funding education. Mississippi has a relatively high percentage of funding that comes in at the state level. And one result of that is, although there is inequity as you move from district to district, the inequity in Mississippi is much less than it is in other states. You get to other states where everything's done on the local level and everything's done through property taxes. And if you think you've got problems with property poor districts in Mississippi, you ought to see Connecticut or New Hampshire, or wherever it is. So there's some advantages of doing things at the state level. I wonder, I don't know, if one of the reasons we continue to have the system that we have is that since we're putting such a large amount of revenue into it, we feel like we should have that ability. I'll also say there strange ways of local revenue. I think that in some places, school districts actually get some local sales tax into the district, which would certainly exacerbate inequality. So it's hard to make decisions as you go from state to state. But I do wonder if there's a correlation about the percentage of funding at the state level and the percentage of funding at the local level. The other thing I would suggest to members of the legislature, and the legislative members may understand this more clearly than others. Hypothetically, just speaking hypothetically, if there is a $1,000 teacher pay raise, hypothetically, a legislator might want credit for the $1,000 teacher pay raise, because what did you say? Teachers were always what? Upset, or what was the term you used?
Gosh, I can't remember what I said.
Energized,
They are motivated.
Well,
usually.
anyway, they have much to be distressed about, so there's a reason they're always on edge, with good reason. But I mean, seriously, if the funding for the teacher pay raise is basically coming from the state, there is the desire on the part of the state to at least have some say-so in how the teacher pay raise is distributed, and frankly, to get credit for it.
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Senator Blunt?
Thank you, Senator Brown. I think your comments about the MAEP and its role in in helping all districts across state, whether they're poor, or rich, or rural, or urban. Very true, and it emphasizes the need to fully fund the formula. And when we have gotten outside of that, whether it be with local supplements or state supplements based on the standardized test scores of individual schools, we only increase that inequity when we provide supplements based on things that are going to have a disproportionate impact. Ms. Jones, I see Ms. Jones in the audience. You brought up the salary structure and its legacy in the pre-integration movement. Miss Gladys Bates, a teacher here in Jackson, for whom Bates Elementary in South Jackson, in my district, is named, was one of the teachers who brought the lawsuit that dealt with what African-American teachers and white teachers were paid. And a lot of what we're still dealing with comes from that era. And when we've done some of these things in recent years, we've sort of fallen back on that. But I'm real interested in this PERS conversation. I know all of us are committed to the long-term integrity of PERS, and my position has always been exactly what Chairman DeBar said at the beginning, which is I am looking to the Board of Trustees of the system who have a fiduciary responsibility to the current retirees and the current people in the system to protect the long-term integrity of the system. And one thing that I think we do right here in Mississippi is we have everybody in the same system. We've got teachers, state employees, city employees, county employees, university employees, community college employees, and we're all in the same system. And we need to be really careful when we start talking about separating PERS members and providing different options for them. I know when I first got my job, I wasn't thinking about my retirement either. But my father told me in my mid-20s to put a little money in an IRA. And I said, I'm not going to be retired forever. That's the craziest. I don't need to do that. Well, I'm glad I listened to my father. And I know that teachers or any other public employee in the system would like to have a little bit more money at the end of the month, maybe for the first 5 years. We all would. But I don't know if you asked them in 25 years if they wanted their retirement based on 20 years of work, how they'd feel about that. So, and if you look at the chart that Mr. Higgins gave us on page 5, you will see the ratio of people in the system who are paying in to people who are retired and drawing benefits is increasingly becoming, it's getting closer all the time. In other words, you have fewer people paying in and more people who are retired. And I'm not saying this to criticize anybody here, but just to say that the teacher issue is incredibly important. The PERS issue includes not only every teacher, but 15% of every single person working in this state is a member of PERS. And they may be married to somebody else who's not in the system. This touches a lot of folks. So I've learned a lot today, and I think you are the perfect person to wrap up this session. But we need to be extremely careful when we look at things like a defined benefit plan where your benefits when you're retired are based on your stock market picks or what mutual fund you chose when you were a young person, and its overall impact on the system. And if we are going to consider any of that, we need to involve the Board of Trustees of the retirement system in anything that we do, because this is not just every teacher. This is, like I said, 15% of every working Mississippian is an active member of PERS. And I know we all want to protect that. So let's just, if anybody's watching this and is worried about it, just know that we're all on the same page with wanting to protect that system for teachers and for everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blunt. Senator McMahon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dr. Pruitt, one of my colleagues in the Senate texted me, they're watching online, and they wanted to know, how does Mississippi compare in the number of districts within this state compared to the number of districts in the other states? How do we average?
It's almost as wide as an ocean front. So you've got remarkably, so like in Kentucky, I had 173 districts because it included independent, they call them independent schools there. Some places call them city school districts. You actually have a smaller number, if I remember correctly, actually in Texas, and in Florida, you've got like 400 and something districts. So I don't know that that's an easy answer. We could get that for you and get it to you. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's actually something that you hear a lot of policymakers in different states show concern over about. Is it efficient? Is it a good way if you've got more versus less? What I can tell you is that and I actually had to do this in Kentucky where we had to consolidate because we had some financial issues in one of the districts. It's also one of the hardest things probably to do in education is to start to condense or combine any of those.
Yeah, I was neither for it or against. I just want to know where we lined up. I'd love to see that email.
I can provide more for you right now, actually, because I've looked at this. Delaware and Maryland are two states with the fewest number of school districts. Delaware is 13, Maryland is 24. Oklahoma has the most with over 500 school districts, and Mississippi hovers somewhere around the middle with, I believe, if I'm correct, about 160, a little bit more than that, school districts. So hopefully that provides a little bit extra for you.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank the chairman for having this committee today. And, like you, Dr. Pruitt, earlier you said, look, I'm interested in a holistic compensation package. Actually take time to go in and visit with the school teachers and after work and listen to them in their faculty meetings. And many times pay increase, although they'd like to have more pay, that's not the top thing on their agenda. The top, normally, it's the rigors of the testing that are placed upon them to meet testing guidelines, and it doesn't really allow them to teach. In other words, they're just repetitive doing things to be sure that their students test well. Something else that they share with me is the lack of support for discipline in the classrooms. I actually take time and I will visit a couple of high schools a year and sit through an English class or a history class in public schools. And I was pretty amazed and shocked when I first started doing this at the lack of discipline. In one particular history class I attended, the teacher was teaching the lesson, and the 11th graders were on their phone. They were communicating, doing things, and he never let up. I mean, he just kept doing the lesson. So afterwards, I went over and sat at his desk, and or he came over and sat where I was sitting. He's like, "What'd you think?" And I said, "Well, I was really surprised by the lack of discipline." And he said, "Look, I can't put them in the hallway. I get in trouble for that. I can't send them to the office because they send them right back to me." So that's a big concern of theirs. And then just the way they're treated as colleagues by administration, and they're treated by their other colleagues. And then the pay increase falls somewhere in that top 5 or 6, but most of the time, is that what you see in other states as well?
I'd say it's pretty consistent. Yeah. I mean, it's why I don't envy your job. I mean, everybody always looks for a silver bullet. And the only thing a silver bullet's good for is killing a werewolf. Because there's not an easy answer to any of this stuff. But I'd say that a lot of what you're saying is very consistent. Some of those things I think are wrapped up in or could be managed better in some of the, for instance, like we talked about, an induction program or a full year residency program where, I mean, my wife and my son went into education without going through education coursework. And a part of what they had to learn was how do you manage discipline in a classroom? But there are some of those things you could manage with induction programs, with residency programs. I mean, we have doctors go through residency programs. Why not teachers too? Problem, as most things end up coming back down to cost. But a lot of the things that you're talking about, I hear all the time. I heard it when I was in Kentucky and when I was in Georgia. It's pretty, they want to feel, as much as anything, they want to feel like professionals. And part of that is that they are prepared to do their job well, which is where the discipline comes in. It's where, feeling like when they go to the grocery store, they're not just having people yell at them because, this, that, or the other. It is really that whole package.
Well, I try to listen closely to the educators. And in my closing comment, I would like to make a comment, Mr. Chairman. I would like to bring it to the committee's attention that Pete Smith, representing MDE, did participate in the entirety of the committee hearing today. And I'm grateful that Mr. Pete was here to hear what was being shared. And I'm grateful for that. Most of my questions that I had for Dr. Gavin earlier in the day have been answered through other testimony. And I think that I'm satisfied. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Delano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Pruitt, while you're here, I'd like to get your opinion on something and give me your insight. One other component that when we talk about accountability and efficiencies in the classroom is a per student ratio for teachers. Can you give me some idea of what your member states look like and as a general rule, or can you give me some insight into that?
So what I remember is that we don't necessarily see where there is a lot of that placed at state level. That tends to be a little bit more determined at the local level. I know in Georgia, we used to have some pretty hard and fast minimum class size, or max class size rather. And they went away from that several years ago. I think that you see more people trying to push that to the local level. It's a hard nut to crack because on the one side, there's not a lot of research that supports, X number of students per teacher will automatically increase achievement. Now, again, pardon the science thing, but I will say that there are some coursework, especially things like science, career and technical education, where you have some safety factors that become real issues on top of the achievement factors. But from what I recall, and we can actually pull that for you and get a full rundown of that if you'd like. But from what I recall, we've seen more states in recent years go to push that more toward the district level. Because they feel like they have the funding, the control of the funds, so they can make some of those decisions.
Yeah, I understand that. So just in general, can you give me some idea of what you, if I were to walk into classrooms in, let's say, Georgia, how many students should I expect to see in a typical classroom per, with one teacher? Is it 30 or is it 20? Is it 10? I mean,
Well, so I would say in your urban schools, you're going to see higher numbers. My wife is teaching high school physics and she has a class right now of 33. And her smallest class, I think, is 29. My son is in a more suburban school and he has classes between 24 and 29, if I remember correctly. You're going to see, a lot of it depends on the size of the school as well, in terms of financially how much they can afford to bring more teachers in. Now, the flip side of that, just a little side note, is during COVID last year, because of having the online aspect, we also saw, or I experienced with my son anyway, where there were some teachers that had, upwards of 170 to 200 students in a class because they were all online. It's a little different, obviously. But I think when you walk into the classrooms, it really sort of depends on, I think you're going to see, and this is just me talking, I don't have research to back this up, but my gut is you're going to see higher numbers in urban or suburban areas than you will in some of our more rural areas.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pruitt. I think that if in all the classrooms that I've been to in our state, which mainly have been in South Mississippi for me personally, it's generally been more than 20 students per classroom, no matter what type of a class it is, unless it's a computer science class where they have a number of stations. But I appreciate your input on that and your your knowledge of what other states are doing. Mr. Chairman, I do have a couple of other questions that aren't really directed to Dr. Pruitt, but just some comments that that I made just a second ago, and see if you can help me with this, or maybe somebody else in this room will be able to help. But if you look at MDE's reports that they have for classroom teacher counts and average salaries, there are two types of teachers. Number one, there is a classroom teacher. And then number two, there's an instructional personnel. And I'm trying to understand what the differences of the, in those two are. And there are certainly more classroom teachers than there are instructional personnel. Do you know what those, how those different personnel are classified?
I'm not aware of that.
Would anybody in here have any idea what the difference between the two would be? Mr. Chairman, the reason why I bring that up is that
Typically,
in the same, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Typically in most states, instructional personnel can include most roles that provide instruction in addition to teachers. Usually these do not include roles like school nurses, librarians, things like that, although there are different definitions for this state by state. So specifically, you'll have to double check that for Mississippi.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, Mr. Chairman, when we give teacher pay raises, do we give an equal raise to all people that would be considered classroom teachers, such as, if a teacher gets it, well, the librarian get it, or in some of the other people that may not be instructional, but would be considered a quote unquote classroom teacher? Do we know that?
I'm looking at Corbin, and Corbin is our LBO analysis. And I confirmed with me, I think that is true. Yes, we do.
So that would go out to everyone. The reason why I brought it up is that, I'm trying, as we go through all these numbers that we're looking at, I want to verify, and I want to see how the number, especially for the average salary of 46,843, where that comes from and how does that roll. And that does roll consistent with a report on MDE, on MDE's website for the average salary for a classroom teacher. However, the average salary for instructional personnel is 49,229, which is a significant number, or a significant change or delta in those two numbers. And I think that that's something that I'm just curious if there's consistency across all of these other states that we're being compared to when we're looking at some of those numbers. And then also, as we give these increases in salaries, how are these impacted? But the last thing that I wanted to leave you with was something that I thought was rather unusual and strange, but the pupil in ADA per classroom teacher is reported as the state average to be 13.75 students per instructor. And I'd never see, or I do not, that's not my experiences in the classroom. And it's never been what I've heard from other teachers that are actually in the classroom. We're always criticized for packing and stacking teacher or classrooms. And that would obviously, based on this formula that we have here and how this is calculated by the state MDE, would certainly impact the average salaries of both the classroom teachers and the instructional teachers. And I just would really like to have some explanation of why this per pupil number is 13.75, because obviously there's a lot of other salaries that are being considered that are outside of the classroom. So I make that point, and I'd really like to have someone give us an explanation of that.
That's a great point. I think we're going to look into that, and we can get some information to you, Senator Delano.
If I may too, I can clarify the salary part. We do pull our data, as well as pretty much all respectable sources pull salary data from NEA. It is pretty much the singular source for average teacher salaries and has been for the last 7 years. In fact, the federal government also uses NEA data. So those salaries that are marked as teacher salaries, those are described by NEA as salaries for for teachers who are in charge of a classroom, whether they be certified or uncertified teachers. The salaries averaged for all instructional personnel, NEA describes that as including teachers, but also teachers' assistants, other instructional staff within the building, as well as assistant principals and principals, which is why those salaries are typically higher than teacher salaries, because they are skewed by administrative salaries. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Senator Delano. Senator Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've about almost gotten what I want to ask. But let me just make a statement, please, reference to some of the questions been asked here. Classroom teachers really should have about 25, 26 students. But the best way to keep order and discipline in the classroom, reference to what you're talking about, is to teach. Remember, students are a bundle of energy at that grade level. You have to teach them. I moved, teachers have big desks. I moved my chair away from it. I didn't need a chair. I used a stool because I'm at the board all the time. And when you can show in the science and the chemistry and science, like C. Hoskin Cafe, that's the slogan for protoplasm and biological science. You can go to all of these, and when you have them that learn the bones and the systems, all that stuff is exciting to them. So you don't need it. If you set up in a chair and point to what they ought to be doing, you're going to have problems. You have to be up so you can watch everybody. And I'm talking about integrated school. I'm not talking about just one school. I pull this because as an African-American in integrated schools, everybody had to look me over. I told them, you don't have time to look me over. You better get this chemistry here. That's what really counts. They looking at me as though, I don't know what people thought, because I was busy trying to get the information out. Remember, they're a bundle of energy, and you're not going to get rich teaching, and you got to love it in order to do it. Thank you. I'm finished. I won't say another word.
That was a good one to say, though, because I will say that is, hey, I mean, we know for everything from research to just practical reality, kids learn more if it's relevant to them and if they're doing it and not viewing it. Yeah. It makes a huge difference.
Thank you. Senator Norwood.
Thank you, Dr. Pruitt. When we were in Nashville, we talked about some examples were given, but they did not provide the information that was relative to minority and districts of color. During the pandemic, to close the gap, the learning gap, or the loss of learning, if you will, do you have any research to show what's working and what some minority districts, districts of color may be doing to try and make up in that endeavor?
So it's still too early to have any, what I would call true research. We are actually undergoing a process right now we're reviewing all state plans to see what different districts are doing, in particular, looking for what's going on with districts of color, or districts with students of color. One of the things that we've started being very clear on with people is that unfinished learning, we talk about unfinished learning more than learning loss for this reason. A, I don't know how you learn what you didn't have. But B, I think unfinished learning has been going on for years. COVID was not the start of that. COVID actually just expanded it to affect more students. Our students of color and students of poverty have been experiencing unfinished learning for a long time. And we know that the traditional way of doing remediation is not what helps a student catch up. So we are evaluating what's going on with different districts and trying to first just get a list of what they're doing. We're seeing where some of them are doing summer school. We're seeing where some of them are doing tutoring before or after school. I don't know that we're seeing at this point, or we could say with any certainty, that any of those strategies are working. In fact, to be perfectly blunt, from our perch, I don't know that I'm seeing that we're doing a lot, what I would consider really innovative across the board. I'm sure there are pockets that are doing that, but a lot of it's doing things just longer and louder. My hope would be that we're going to start seeing a real emphasis in preparing our teachers to teach a different way than just trying to catch a kid up because they missed some standards from the year before. Mississippi, I know in my conversations with Dr. Wright, there's been a better focus here on what I would call acceleration. In other words, teaching a current year set of standards, but recognizing that teachers need to be pulling some kids along rather than just going back and teaching the previous year stuff. So at this point, I couldn't stand here with any kind of validity and say, this is what's working. And we're actually in the process of collecting just what people are doing. And then we're going to watch it and see what we see, or what, if we see actual progression on state tests and NAEP over the next couple of years. That's one of the hardest things about education is it's hard to get real-time data and know immediately how quickly something's working. One of the things that we recommend people do is, especially at the local level where they've got all these federal funds now, have some feedback loops that are constantly moving in those communities to find out if what they are investing in is actually making a difference in the students' lives and in the students' learning. Unfortunately, we're not seeing enough people do that. So I am concerned that we're going to see a lot of people spend a lot of money, but not know if it's really helping kids or not. But we are really pushing our states and districts that we work in to have that kind of feedback loop so we can have a better real-time feel for that.
Well, follow up on that, Mr. Chairman, is and there's a correlation, I believe, between, and I know they told us not to use the term learning loss, but for this reference, I will. Yeah, but correlation between the learning loss and the dropouts.
Mm-hmm.
And the students that I think we use the term can't locate, they're subsequently going to impact the dropout. So I think that after a while, we're going to be in a crisis unless we come up with something that dropout is going to lead to other negative aspects. So I mean, anything that you could provide as soon as you can, I think that it would be appreciated.
Well, and you'll get an amen out of me for that. I mean, the reason why we see dropouts is because they become disenfranchised with the school setting itself. So them feeling like they're even farther behind could very well cause them to decide, oh, there's no way I can catch up. So we've got to really rethink how we're doing school in general, I think. Mississippi has shown the ability to do some pretty incredible things. And I unfortunately, I guess I'm probably going to have to somewhat give some final remarks here because we actually do have a plane we've got to catch. But I mean, the work that's been done in Kentucky on reading since 2009 has been pretty incredible. So for me, from my perspective, if there's any state that can figure this out and can do it with a level of urgency and a level of priority, I think you guys have the pieces in place. It's just a matter of figuring out which way you want to go. And we're happy to support you in that. So as soon as we get data, we're happy to share it with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Norwood. Dr. Pruitt, I think that's it. I know you've been up there a couple hours, so we appreciate all the information that you have. It was very timely and it actually wrapped up everything we've discussed today. So thank you to your group, Lee and everybody for coming down, and hope you have a safe trip back. So
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. That'll be the last witness. I want to thank the committee for being here today, for being attentive, being inquisitive. I think we had a lot of good discussion today and to help us go forward. And just in closing, I speak for the committee here, I think, when I say we want to thank all our teachers out there that are not here, that are probably in work, doing the Lord's work, as Dr. Pruitt said. So we appreciate it. Appreciate all you do, especially these last couple of years, being flexible, being hardworking, and doing a really good job for us. And we appreciate everything you do. And so with that, does anybody have any final comments, questions, concerns? Not Senator Brian? No. Thank you. With that, we are adjourned.